Chapter 46. Kuchia didn't ease them out of the airlock, instead opting to blast forward at 3 Gs and rising only 2 meters from the hull. Kelly sucked in a surprised breath as he maneuvered the skiff in a tight turn and wove back through the other training domes. She kept her eyes peeled for starfish or attacking pine cones, but she was more focused on mapping the enemy positions. That part was easy. They were fucking everywhere. The hull plates just outside Dome 3 weren't the only ones that had begun to dissolve or melt or whatever the pine cones were doing to them. It looked as though dozens, maybe hundreds of hull plates were meeting the same fate. "Kuchia, slight change in plan." "Really? Now, sir?" "Keep weaving," she said. "They don't seem to mind us so long as we don't get too close. We've got a much bigger problem than just the hull plates near us. It's happening across the station." "Shit," Kuchia said. "We don't have enough claymores and grenades to do much." "No, we don't," she admitted. "So we'll just have to see how many we can get to jump." "Jump?" Kelly grinned to herself. "Jump right into turret fire." Kuchia pulled them around Dome 2, the skiff practically hugging the cylindrical structure to remain beneath the overhang. "Copy, sir. Where do you want to start?" "Near the main dorsal airlock. That's priority 1. "Copy, sir. Just say when." Kelly pulled 2 claymores from her pouch. "I'm going to toss a party favor or 2, and then we'll come back for another pass." "Copy," Kuchia said, and continued winding them around Dome 2. As he broke the circle to head to Dome 1, Kelly flung a claymore to the hull plate behind them, the object flying into a herd of pine cones chewing through an already sunken plate. As she suspected, the pine cones and starfish didn't even react. Kuchia wound them around Dome 1, as she knew in a moment or two he'd head back to Dome 3 and then wind around and shoot for the airlock. She flung a claymore down before reaching into her bag for another. A dim shadow appeared next to her, and Kelly immediately dropped to her knees, the claymore unactivated and inert, floating at her feet, and grabbed her rifle. A pair of darker-than-space arms passed by the open cupola where her head had been a moment before. "We got company," Kelly said. Kuchia grunted and said, "I noticed, sir." He moved back beneath the overhang, and Kelly popped up again, rifle in one arm, a claymore in the other. She threw another in the direction of the dorsal airlock, cursed herself for a bad too-high throw, and then mentally shrugged. She'd set all the claymores for a wide spherical detonation pattern. It would blast everything in 5 meters. If it was floating above the hull a bit, so be it. It would still do the damage. She caught sight of a glint of silver passing by her, and immediately snap-aimed and fired. The starfish creeping up on Kuchia disintegrated into crumbs of shattered carapace. The skiff pilot didn't seem to even know it had happened. "Last bend, sir," Kuchia said. "Break off and let's hit it." "Copy, sir," he said, and the skiff accelerated another G. Kelly pulled another claymore while she scanned for errant threats. She hadn't exactly expected space to be filled with the things, but she'd expected the pine cones to have more air support than they'd had thus far. "They just don't consider you a threat yet," she reminded herself. "That's all about to change. Are you ready for that?" Didn't matter, because it was about to happen. Kelly flung the claymore, this one closer to the main airlock hatch, followed by another in the field of pine cones on the airlock's opposite side. Those 2 plates appeared to have sunk the lowest. For all she knew, the creatures were mere moments from breaking through. Kuchia flew past and curled around, heading for Dome 1. A few starfish had appeared from the shadows, but they hadn't yet attacked. They seemed more like reconnaissance. That word gave Kelly the chills. She'd never thought the things more than primitive animals, but what if they weren't? What if they communicated? Kelly aimed at one of the starfish, led the target slightly, and pulled the trigger. A gravitic teardrop smashed into the creature, and it disappeared. The others that had been moving swerved off into a higher altitude. Kuchia reached Dome 1's overhang and again hugged the dome. "We've back to Dome 3, Kelly said. "When we round it, I want your cannons firing." She could hear a smile in Kuchia's voice. "Copy that, sir. Also, we have company keeping pace with us." "I saw, sir," he said. "My claymores are still there." "Only because I took care of the threat," she thought, but didn't say. "They may be getting a little anxious. Just be on guard." "Anxious I like. Hungry, not so much." Kelly managed a thin smile while she mentally checked her plan of action in her head and all the things she could do when it fell apart, as she knew it would. Kuchia shot across the boundary again toward Dome 3, and Kelly tossed another claymore into the sunken field of pine cones. "Straight at the airlock once we round." "Aye, sir," Kuchia said, his voice a little tighter now. Stress, fear, and an exhilarating rush of adrenaline vibrated her every nerve and cell. Time seemed to slow, her eyes flicking briefly in the direction of space and seeing a curtain of shimmering light in the distance. Something big was coming. She quickly returned her stare to checking Kuchia's back as they rounded Dome 3. Kelly had time to change her grip on her rifle, and then the skiff vibrated beneath her. Kuchia flew the diagonal from Dome 3 to Dome 1, the skiff a mere meter and a half above the hull plates, gravitic cannons firing 4 rounds a second into the field of pine cones. The moment the rounds struck their targets, blasting pine cones of starfish aside, dozens of starfish left the hull plate and immediately pursued the skiff, even as it continued strafing the hull. The first claymore detonated and cleared a 5-meter-wide area on the tortured, damaged deck. A beat later, another went off, further shredding and clearing the field of creatures. Kuchia's gravitic cannons splashed harmlessly against the deck while spattering and smashing dozens of creatures per second. Kelly turned just in time to catch sight of a pair of starfish arms reaching for her. Without thinking, she pulled the trigger and the silvery maw disappeared. "Faster, and get us another meter higher." "Copy," Kuchia said, and the skiff immediately rose and accelerated. Kelly fired her rifle at any shapes flying at their level or above them. She mostly missed, but the starfish seemed to get the hint and moved a little further away. That wouldn't last long, though. The more Kuchia ripped through the fields with his cannon, the more starfish leaped up and gave chase. Kuchia wound around Dome 2, hugging the overhang, cannons still clearing the path. Another claymore detonated, and this time, every field she could see twitched as one. A moment later, they all rose from the hull. Kelly suddenly realized they were surrounded by hundreds of thousands of creatures more than a meter in size that could shred the skiff like cannon fire, not to mention the angry squadrons of starfish gathering behind them. Maybe this hadn't been her best idea after all. She pulled a grenade from the pouch, set the timer, and tossed it head high behind her. It detonated a few heartbeats later in a spherical blast that nuked who knew how many of the creatures. "Shit!" Kuchia shouted. The skiff slammed into something hard enough to rattle her bones, her hip smashing into the cupola's lip, pinching her flesh through the armor. Her mag boots kept her from flying off the skiff, but the motion still wrenched something in her back. Kelly turned to face 4 and saw 3 starfish clinging to the gunwale, the first of them reaching an arm to grab Kuchia. She aimed and blasted it off the side, but was too slow to get the second. The claymore, however, did its job and annihilated the remaining starfish. "Sir, they're swarming in front of me!" The fields had gotten the message, and the Exos had all ceased their ministrations on the hull plates to chase their assailant. With seemingly every creature on Trident's dorsal side closing in on her, she didn't think they'd be flying for long. "Pull up!" Kelly yelled. The skiff jumped and was now more than 5 meters above the hull plates, a swirling plume of creatures following like a tail. Trident's cannons finally had targets, and the world filled with gravitic teardrops. Good ideas and bad ideas share a lot of similarities. For instance, a good idea might involve an easy victory predicated on valid, probable assumptions. A bad idea, on the other hand, may rely upon nothing more than a hunch or, as often happens, simple bad luck. In either case, however, the ideas, good or bad, are ultimately tested and either succeed or fail not on their merits, but whether or not the universe was in a particularly good mood that day. In other words, chaos is the ultimate decision-maker when it comes to good and bad. Talby wasn't thinking about this, nor was he thinking about anything so philosophically weighty. Instead, he was trying to figure out how he was going to lead thousands of enemy creatures beneath Trident and back to the dorsal side where the turrets could annihilate them with ease. He continued making the SV jump and spin to avoid the massive onslaught of silver acid sprays arcing through the darkness behind him. Wiggins had fired until his weapons had to cool down. The gunner would have to watch his rate of fire when they came back up. To make matters worse, they were taking hits. The SV had suffered multiple acid splashes, one of which damaged a starboard thruster. 2 ventral thrusters no longer responded at all, seriously limiting his acrobatics. Talby crossed below Trident's massive dorsal side and plummeted downward past hundreds of modules, the turrets all beginning to fire at the horde behind him. Something hit the aft and the SV slid sideways in response, structural integrity alert suddenly flashing on his HUD. Cursing, Talby went with the slide but flipped the craft to keep it on course. The SV shuddered again at the aft, the vibration hard enough to rattle Talby's teeth. "What was that?" Wiggins didn't answer, nor was his turret firing. Also, his cam feed was dead. "Wiggins?" Talby flicked his eyes to the SV's armor outline and saw most of the aft had been critically damaged, although his engines were still at 70%. "Trident," Talby shouted, "I'm bringing you targets." There was no response from the station, either because of the creature's distortion effects or damage to his comms. It didn't matter. He'd be lucky if he made it partway beneath the ventral hull before he was simply overrun. His engines were failing. Talby pushed the craft as close to the racks of modules as he dared, the occasional line of silver flashing across his cockpit or hitting the fuselage. Integrity warnings continued flashing, letting him know the entire ass end of the SV was open to space. He doubted Wiegand's was even still in the gunner's couch. The world ahead of him moved and jittered with a slight shimmer which grew in size, effect, and clarity with each passing heartbeat. Rather than slow down, Talby redlined the gravitic engines, heading straight for whatever was coming. If he was lucky, very, very lucky, he'd skirt through the outer edge and maybe bring his horde into some friendly fire, not to mention Trident's turrets. He finally passed the modules, turned, flipped, and continued burning across Trident's ventral side. His brain, however, was doing all of this by reflex, because the rest of him was frozen with terror. A thing, or maybe a thing made of many things, floated beneath Trident Station. Talby made out thousands of eyes, alien organs pulsing beneath translucent flesh, a mass of writhing, squirming shapes seeming to rise up through the creature's translucent guts. Some were popping through its skin to become starfish-like creatures, and other shapes he'd never seen. Trident's ventral turrets were firing full on, each gravitic pulse followed by another. Their number, however, was dwindling. Talby made out dark shapes flying into the turrets, blocking them, or maybe even destroying the turret and the human operating it. The great beast of eyes, arms, tentacles, and chelicera opened its ghostly, shimmering maw to swallow Talby whole. "Dive!" appeared on his HUD in large red block letters. His brain reacted to the word as though Dunn had given him a direct order. The SV dropped like a stone, the attitude thrusters burning to stop forward momentum, while the gravitics plunged him toward open space. Just as the shimmer seemed on the verge of swallowing him, 5 more alerts appeared on his HUD. All said the same thing. Incoming. The world flashed with bright white, and his HUD flickered away for a moment before a wave of energy slammed the SV further away from Trident. The craft tumbled, affording him a view of the maelstrom. Talby watched with silent fascination as multiple missiles, the kind Black carried, smashed into a flotilla of exosolar creatures. The massive Leviathan had taken several hits and appeared significantly wounded, although that hadn't stopped it from reaching out to the station with its massive alien limbs. A glowing shape moved in from the other side of the station, and for a brief moment, Talby thought it was some kind of fairy tale angel come to save them. Then it fired. Massive blasts of gravitic energy pulsed from the shape, each smashing into the giant form and splashing across its brood. Another broadside blast lit the darkness, and this time, Talby was certain a large chunk of the shimmering thing had broken off or disintegrated. 3 more missiles moved in, each detonating directly on the creature in conjunction with another broadside from the strange ship. No, not a strange ship, he thought. That's the LeBlanc. Has to be. Something hit the SV, and it began tumbling again. Cursing, Talby performed another acrobatic maneuver while moving his eyes over his cams. He wasn't surprised to see 5 starfish chasing him, nor the small herd of pine cones behind them. He cut the engines, flipped, and let the cannons roar, the blast taking out 2 of the starfish, but completely missing the others. Flipping again, he redlined the engines, although they were only giving him 4 Gs worth of thrust. He couldn't outrun the starfish, and he couldn't outmaneuver them. They would catch him. The only variable was time. The LeBlanc's guns were making short work of the Leviathan. The missiles Black had fired had done more than their fair share of the damage. Now all he had to do was finish the job. 4 more missiles would be here in 20 seconds, and while he was out of their range, he moved closer to the station before delivering another broadside. Nearly all of space shimmered beneath Trident Station. Gunny's instruments lit up from exotic radiation, and Void only knew what kind of particles humanity hadn't known existed. That said, the effects were diminishing with each broadside. The only problem? He calculated he needed to fire another 50 or so to finish the job. Considering a large group of the Horde was now repositioning to attack him, he didn't think he'd get the chance. If he couldn't hold the creatures off, they'd slowly tear apart the LeBlanc until they could get at the tender meat of electronics and quantum tech. Then Gunny would be helpless. He oriented the ship to point away from the incoming creatures and goosed the drives. The massive ship jumped forward in space, giving him a little more breathing room. He loosed another broadside at the Leviathan and jumped again. This time, a group of creatures was waiting for him. Several starfish swooped in and attached to his dorsal hull. Mentally growling, Gunny checked the timing on the incoming missiles and hit the throttle while changing attitude. Instead of heading away from the Leviathan, he flew directly at it at more than 4 Gs. The Leviathan, little more than a shimmering silhouette to Gunny's artificial eyes, opened one of its many mouths. The starfish on the LeBlanc's hull were joined by dozens of others, all of them hooking their talons into the ship's hull plates and beginning to pull. "Enjoy your meal," he told them. "It's your last." Just as the first hull plate succumbed, the first of the missiles arrived. It detonated on the Leviathan's far flank, the gravitic energy cascading over its form like chain lightning. The second detonation was a little closer, and this time, the energy smashed into the LeBlanc, radiating over its hull. The starfish clinging to it were disintegrated while the LeBlanc spun away from the blast's force. The next missile was a little too close and damaged 2 of the starboard maneuvering engines. He rotated the LeBlanc and loosed 2 more broadsides in quick succession. The 4th missile detonated on the creature's starboard side, the gravitic gun rounds arriving milliseconds later. Energy from the missile strike coursed over the creature and its brood, and a gap in the creature's middle opened just in time to receive 16 gravitic rounds. Trident's ventral side bloomed with light as though someone had fired a cosmic flare. In the brief flash's afterglow, the LeBlanc captured every shape, every detail of every creature just before the wave of gravitic energy, far more powerful than Gunny had thought possible, washed over the LeBlanc, and all of his sensors went dead. Chapter 47. As the turret fire tore apart the funnel cloud, Kelly kept her eyes flicking between cam views, searching for incoming starfish. Trident's gunners were making short work of the massive creatures, but many were diving back below their fire, finally figuring out they were safer on the hull. A few lines of silver acid flew past her cupola, one close enough for her to touch. She closed the turret housing and turned it immediately. Several starfish were coming straight at them, arms swept forward, mouths pulsing silver death. Kuchia's cannons were recharging, but Kali's turret was primed. She scattered the starfish squadron and managed to take out 2 of them. The only problem? There were dozens more. A starfish landed on the skiff and Kuchia's last claymore detonated. A moment later, another slammed into the skiff's starboard hull, a mere meter from Kuchia. She opened her mouth to shout a warning, and then the creature disappeared in a cloud of carapace and silver. "Lieutenant," Lowell called out as another round of gravitics tore apart an incoming squadron. "I think you need some help." Kelly grinned as she shot another starfish to pieces. "We do," she said. "Where have you been all my life?" Lowell's SV shadowed the skiff from above, its turret pointed at the hull and blasting anything that came within range of Kelly. It was about the best air support she could have hoped for. "Sir," Lowell said, "you're getting close to the dorsal edge. Orders?" "Kuchia, circle back. Maintain an altitude of 7 meters from the deck. Lowell, anyone else around?" "Winds should be headed this way," Lowell said. "I have no comms with Trident." The skiff decelerated and kicked hard to port at the same time. Kuchia made a wide, sloppy 180-degree turn, the skiff barely grazing Trident's edge. "Lowell, cover. Kuchia, get us back to Dome 3. "Copy, sir," the 2 men said. Kelly hailed Trident, hoping the distortion field had lessened, but no such luck. The pine cones and starfish had returned, creating a massive field in front of the main dorsal airlock. Kelly wasn't sure, but she thought the damn things were accelerating their destruction. "All, clear the airlock. Repeat, kill it all." Kuchia decelerated the skiff and adjusted his attitude so Kelly would have a clear line of fire. He gently pushed the skiff into a slide and the cannons came to life. Kelly joined in with her turret while Lowell did the same. A barrage of gravitic death rained down on the pine cones and starfish. The ones that tried to rise were caught in the fusillade and shattered. A dark cloud of debris grew across the hull. Kelly slowed her rate of fire to keep from completely draining the cells while Kuchia continued to strafe, carefully timing his shots. "Squadron, this is Trident Command," Portunus said over the comms. "Report in, Squadron. This is—" Kelly smiled grimly and activated her comms. "Squadron here." Dunn's voice immediately filled her ears. "What's your status?" "How do you say we're kicking the fuck out of the stranded aliens?" "Main dorsal airlock is clear," she said. "I have Lowell and went with me." "No sign of the other fire teams?" "No, sir," she said. "We just now got Lowell and went back." Dunn was silent for a moment. "How much damage is there?" Kelly continued firing. A portion of a field of pine cones took flight just high enough for the station's turrets to cut them to pieces. Her own turret cells were beginning to flag, and she further slowed her rate of fire. "I'd say 1/4 meter of the hull plates have eroded in places. Maybe more, sir. Copy, Dunn said. We have visual on Black. She's nearly in gun range. Way to go, Black, Kelly thought. Sir, this cleanup is going to take a while. One skiff and an SV is not going to get it done any time soon. Copy. We're seeing what we can do about that. As if on cue, Black rose from Trident's dorsal aft. Her autocannons, normally used for clingers on, blasted the hull and the fields. The remaining pine cones, dying whether they chose to stay or flee, finally attempted to leave the hull en masse. Kelly, Cuccia, Lowell, and his gunner filled space with deadly teardrops while Black fired chaff and gravitic rounds like fireworks. Kelly knew they wouldn't get them all, but that was okay. They'd come back for another go. Lieutenant, Black said, the LeBlanc is disabled on the ventral side of the station, but the threat has been eliminated. Excellent, Black. That said, Black continued, we have severe damage on the ventral as well as dorsal. It appears dozens of hull plates will have to be repaired in each area. Black spoke nonchalantly while raining down death on the remaining fields of pine cones. Kelly had to remind herself her former crewmate, and ship, was far more capable of multitasking than any human. In the time it took Black to fire a single shot, she could probably recite half of human history. I have this handled, Black said. I suggest you look after the LeBlanc. Cuccia, Lowell, you heard her. Copy, sir, the two men said. Black, who's piloting LeBlanc? I thought only an SE could. That is my understanding as well, Black said. As for who that is, I cannot say. Kelly frowned, a sudden twinge of suspicion kicking away that sense of victory back into paranoia. That's not the same thing as saying I don't know. No, Black agreed, it is not, meaning I have an idea, but I'm unable to share that information at this time. Copy, Kelly said as Cuccia led them to the dorsal edge. In a moment or two, they'd be out in open space and once again easy prey for wayward squadrons of starfish and herds of pine cones. So far, however, that all looked clear. She felt as though she needed to say something to Black, confront her a little more aggressively, but she was also afraid to do that. It expressed distrust in Black's judgment, not to mention whatever secret she was keeping. Kelly didn't for a moment believe Black was keeping the information private without reason. Black, I understand. I'm glad, Black said. Kelly spun the turret to look behind her. Black was still spraying down the hull, her autocannons picking off dark shapes that dared approach her. Her refit had made her the most deadly and powerful warship in the solar system, unless the LeBlanc had a full crew complement, that was. Cuccia piloted the skiff over the side, and they plummeted past damaged hull plates, as well as the occasional debris cloud of shattered carapace. A starfish swooped by, and before she could target it, one of Trident's turrets blew it to pieces. Before they reached the ventral side, the LeBlanc came into view. The massive warship lay derelict in space, its running lights flickering as though short-circuited. Its hull plates looked torn and ripped in places, and the engine array had some particularly nasty acid scars across them. No matter who had been the pilot, they had flown into a buzzsaw. What is that? Cuccia said in a hushed whisper. Kelly had no idea what he was looking at and switched to his feed. Her breath caught in her throat at the sight of millions of shimmering fragments, most completely unrecognizable, while others had the stumps of broken arms and tentacles. How fucking big was that thing? Lowell asked over the comms. A lot bigger than whatever we saw earlier, she said. Boyd wept. I didn't think they got that big. That's the LeBlanc, sir? Lowell asked. That's her, Kelly said. She's looked better. As they approached within 200 meters, Kelly's emergency radio came to life. Instead of a voice, a series of tones and clicks rattled across the comms. A translation appeared on her HUD. Looks like comms are out on the ship, Kelly said. We're being asked to provide air support. Pardon me, sir, but by whom? Cuccia asked. She shrugged. The LeBlanc. Collective ship or not, she saved our asses. Aye, she did, sir, Lowell said. Just wondering why she waited so long. That was a good question. Command to squadron, Dunn said. Squadron here, sir, Kelly said. We have eyes on LeBlanc and she's requesting air support. Dunn was silent for a moment. Copy. Comms are coming back online, as are downed power nodes. Kelly breathed a sigh of relief. The creature's distortion field was dissipating, meaning they'd managed to repel the attack. What's more, it meant there weren't any more Leviathans sneaking around. That in itself was far better news than she'd expected. Cuccia, move in. Let's check LeBlanc's hull. Copy, sir. She switched back to Dunn. Command, do you have comms with the rest of the squadron? We have comms from Wendt. He and his skiff are in the infrastructure level clearing out a nest. Sounds as though they're nearly through. She breathed another sigh of relief. For a moment, she thought she'd lost all of her people. As it was, one skiff and one SV was unaccounted for. Not good. Copy, sir. We're inspecting LeBlanc's hull for clingers. Copy. Out, Dunn said. Calais mapped the LeBlanc's hull and found 3 pine cones clinging to its ventral side, as well as a starfish missing 7 of its 10 arms. The 4 didn't appear as though they could move. She didn't give them the chance. In a few more moments, she and Cuccia finished clearing the ship's hull. The damage was even more severe than she'd thought. If humans had been aboard, they would have been shooting at the creatures between gaps and cracks in the hull plates. This had been close. Lieutenant, I've got movement at the shipyards. A cam feed appeared on her HUD, and she maximized it. Sure enough, multiple craft had left the giant printers and were on course for the LeBlanc. She zoomed in and almost grinned. The shipyards was sending towing automatons to capture the LeBlanc and tow her back to port. She and the remains of the squadron would escort them as far as Trident's Edge, keep them clear of starfish. After that, the collective had to take care of their own business. Calais had Marines to find. The bright flash had knocked out his power for more than 2 minutes before his engines and life support came back to life. He'd been afraid he'd have to ditch for the 5th time in his career and risk being snatched by a starfish and taken wherever the fuck it was they took people they didn't kill. He wouldn't die easy, though. The moment one of those things got its hooks into him, he'd pull a grenade and that would be that. He'd gladly meet the void as a cloud of particles than as the refuse of some exosolar beastie. The engines came to life before dying again and trying another restart. The cycle continued for a few more seconds before one of the engines finally caught. Talby found himself afraid to breathe for fear of jinxing it. After 15 seconds, he pushed the throttle and the craft responded with a reluctant lurch. One engine, completely dead, and another operating at 5%. Shit. He could move faster with thrusters given enough time. And fuel. Talby reoriented the SV and headed toward the ventral hull. He caught sight of a ship out there, several other shapes congregating around it. The shapes lit up with engine plumes, and the massive ship began to move. Either she survived and was damaged, or she was dead and headed for the recycler. Talby couldn't help shaking his head. The collective made no damn sense. There had been an SE aboard the LeBlanc, had to be for it to be piloted, unless that had changed. Was there someone aboard it? A human that had somehow snuck aboard the ship while the rest of Trident had been preparing for war? His scope pinged and 2 shapes appeared on his HUD. Their call signs made him smile. Talby to squadron, he said. Good to see you. Good to see you too, sir, Kelly Morris said. How bad off are you? Bad, he said. I'll make it back to the barn, but this SV is headed for the heap. Engines are blown and I'm operating at 5%. Also missing half my ass. Wiegans? Talby ground his teeth. Didn't make it. As he said the 3 words, he imagined Kelly Morris' face crumbling from a naive hope into grim reality. As an officer, he'd heard this statement or something similar from subordinates far too many times. He knew what she was going through, the undeserved self-recriminations, the guilt, the promise to do better if it meant someone else might not die on her watch. Copy, Kelly Mora finally said. We'll provide air cover for you as soon as the LeBlanc is clear. Aye, sir, Talby said. Looks like she cleared out the area pretty well. How did she do that? Missiles? Talby grinned. Black's missiles, yeah. That and the LeBlanc pounded them with artillery. If I hadn't been chased into the gravitic wash, I might have gotten a good peek at the Leviathan getting its ass handed to it. I'm sure we have cams of that, Kelly Morris said, a reluctant smile in her voice. Hope so, Talby said, because I want to replay that thing getting destroyed over and over again. That was the truth. However, he also knew he'd be seeing that thing in his nightmares for the rest of his life. Don't worry yourself, he thought. Next time they'll send something worse. Done to Talby. Talby here, sir. Any sign of Copenhagen? He winced at the question and sighed off comms. No, sir, no sign. Copy, Dunn said after a brief pause. We're sending personnel into the racks now. A few squiddies decided to put on combat suits. Talby wanted to roll his eyes and talk shit, but instead he said, Glad to hear it, sir. We need 'em. That's a discussion we'll have once you're back aboard. And after a shower, of course. Talby didn't want to tell him that the remains of his gunner were probably splashed across the back of his combat suit, or that his SV was missing most of its aft. He figured he'd let the commander have his moment. After all, they'd won. Hadn't they? Copenhagen ended up mag-crawling. Between the massive artillery barrage and missile fire that had taken place beneath the station, her suit electronics had all but fried. Her HUD no longer functioned at all, neither legs' magnetics functioned, and she had a single glove that sometimes worked, sometimes didn't. Without a functioning jetpack, she had to be careful. The wrong kind of misstep and she'd end up floating away, possibly through the gaps in the rack and into space. 5 meters. 5 void-damned meters and she'd be at the airlock. No jetpack fuel, bingo flechette ammo, drained energy cell for the gravitic rifle, and a single free hand to aim and fire. If another starfish came at her, or something worse, she'd have little chance of escape now. For all intents and purposes, she was done. She pulled herself forward after making sure the maglock held. Another meter. She paused before breaking the maglock and gently placing her hand back against the deck and engaging it again. When it held, she pulled another meter, settled herself as flat against the deck as she could, and pulled again. Something slapped her hand, the maglock breaking on her glove. Copenhaver spun sideways and tried to bring up her rifle. One of the wounded starfish, one missing half its legs, had pursued her in silence and finally caught her. One of its long arms had wrapped around her calf while another joined and squeezed. The pain lit her brain like a supernova as she jammed the rifle into its maw. She pulled the trigger, forgetting the weapon was empty, and stared in horror as the creature's jaws snapped shut and bit the rifle in half. The thing reared back and she knew she was done. A gravitic pulse hit the deck beside the starfish, and it seemed to flinch, its arms loosening the slightest bit around her calf. Copenhaver pulled her flechette pistol, pointed it at the arms, and fired. The round detonated, the strong arms shattering at the base of the body. Copenhaver kicked away the dismembered legs, no longer clutching her like steel bands, and ended up pushing herself toward the airlock. She fired the flechette pistol again and again as the creature tried to recover. 4 pulse rounds tore it apart just before her own flechettes added to the damage. The starfish exploded into crunchy gibbets and shattered shell. Copenhaver floated helplessly in space before something grabbed her shoulder. She turned, pistol ready to fire, and stared up into the visored face of a combat suit. The face inside the helmet had stern, cold eyes and a grim smile. He maglocked to her shoulder and gently pulled her backward, guiding her to the airlock. As they dragged her inside, she watched 3 combat-suited human beings blast away the remnants, still looking for a meal.